It's the second day of the City Writers Festival. Oh, and the weather is gorgeous again. I can't wait.
Yes, and yesterday was so much fun. If today's half as good, I'm going to be really chuffed. I got to speak to so many people in the crowd, and they were all so interesting. So yeah, hopefully I'll have as much luck today.
Oh, we're going to have a fantastic day. I get to speak with such amazing authors as Sophie Green and Donna Glass and Charlotte Wood, who, as you know, won the Stella Prize last year.
Yes, well, I love the Stella Prize. Female authors were excluded from all the main prizes for so long, and I just think it's the best and the most exciting thing to happen to the industry in decades.
I so agree. And so many people have worked so hard to make it happen. It's such a testament to their dedication and their commitment. That we're going to have a fantastic day. So many exciting people to meet and listen to. Let's get going. Today on Word of Mouth TV, we are welcoming the wonderful Sophie Green, who has had a massive success with her debut novel, which I'm not even going to pretend to try and be able to pronounce the title. Sophie, can you tell us how you came to write this book and why you chose that title?
Okay, I'll start the how I came to write it, which stems from a trip. My very first trip to the Northern Territory was in 2014, and then I took 2 subsequent trips. And the very first time I went to the Northern Territory, I was only in Darwin, but I still felt like it was this missing piece of me in a way, which is a strange thing to say. I've grown up in Sydney, lived here all my life, but it just felt like a part of being Australian that I hadn't recognised was even missing, and also a part of an Australian identity that I had known I was missing. And so that was Darwin, and then the next time I went to Katherine, and that was a completely different yet complementary and wonderful experience to see that landscape between Darwin and Katherine, to be in Katherine, which is an incredible town, and to travel back and forth on the Stuart Highway by bus. And so I'd come down in the daytime, and then I went back at dusk, and as I was coming back at dusk, I was looking at the colours of the landscape changing and how interesting that landscape was, and thinking of the distances between people, and then tying that into what I'd known growing up as a child and a teenager, my parents driving my brother and me to visit my godmother in the Riverina, who lived on property there, and thinking about how she and my mother had maintained their friendship over decades across distances, and what that required, and then the role of storytelling in maintaining friendships across distances. So all that was going on in my head as I was on this bus, and I was making notes about the colours and all sorts of stuff, and I started to think, well, books are a way we share stories with each other, and how we tell stories about ourselves without necessarily being explicit about it. So I thought, all right, well, if I were in the country on a property, in a cattle station in the Northern Territory, and I wanted to make a connection with other people, perhaps form some new connections, then perhaps books are the way to do it, would be the way to do it. And so I thought about a book club, set on a cattle station, and I wanted the first book these ladies read to be The Thornbirds by Colleen McCulloch. And Thornbirds was published in 1977, and I didn't want it to be a retrospective selection. I wanted it to be a contemporary selection for them. So that determined when I started the story. So I thought, published in 1977, when would women in the Northern Territory have heard about the Thornbirds and be able to get access to the Thornbirds to start reading it? And I thought the dry season 1978, which is the middle of the year, would do it. So that's how this all came about originally. And then the title did not happen for a very long time. It was being called the Red Dirt Book Club and all sorts of things. But in my head, my publisher asked me one day, what do you call it in your head? And I said Fairvale, because that's the name of the station. And then I happened to be having a conversation with her, and I kind of trailed off and said, well, that was the inaugural meeting of the book club. And she said, that's it. That's the title. So it's the inaugural meeting of the Fairvale Ladies Book.
Is Why the Thornbirds?
That was a book I read as a very tiny person, I was far too young to read it. I was 8. But my parents, in their wisdom, did not censor my reading material. So my parents read avidly. My mother in particular reads widely. And their attitude when I was growing up was that whatever was on the shelves was open to me to read. And so the Thornbirds was there, and as a child who loved to read, I thought it looked like a really big, thick book. And if I could achieve that, if I could read that big, thick book, I'd be saying something. So, of course, I read it. A lot of it went over my head, as it should.
Thank goodness.
Yes, absolutely. And But what stuck with me was this big sweeping story of Australian landscape, and there was a heroine in it. There were all these elements. There was family, there was grief, there was disaster, there was inheritance, there was succession, all these sorts of things. And these were big themes that stayed with me, obviously, throughout my life. And so for me, I just thought there'd be a lot of readers who would have felt the same way about the Thornbirds, and that's why I wanted to put it in.
What was your biggest challenge in writing it?
Redrafting it. Writing it was civilized compared with redrafting it. So there's only 3 chapters left in this book of the original first draft, and so that amount of rewriting, and I think I did it about 4 times, so throwing out hundreds of thousands of words, because rewriting is such a different rhythm, as you would know. Okay, it's such a different rhythm to writing from the get-go, and it's just finding that rhythm to get into redrafting, I think, is the hardest part, and then once you're in, it's okay. But yeah, there were tears. Well, and I think redrafting does open up opportunities for the characters to tell you different things about themselves, and I think, Kate, you would know that it sounds a bit esoteric to say it, but characters do tell us what they want us to know, and even though they are our creations in a way, they seem to exist in a parallel dimension of time that's separate to us.
So are you as creative in the kitchen as you are in the world of books?
Look, I'll start this in a roundabout way by saying that American writer Gretchen Rubin has something called the 4 Tendencies Framework, and in the 4 Tendencies Framework, I am an upholder, and upholders love instructions. So therefore, no, I am not as creative in the kitchen. I love a recipe, and I do cook a lot, but it will usually always be from recipe
So
books.
you are obedient to the recipe, just as you are obedient to your characters.
Yes, I think that's a good analogy. Yes. But I do like a recipe, because it doesn't mean I won't pull together a pasta sauce or something from scratch, but I do like someone else doing that hard thinking for me.
So what's the worst disaster story that you've got about cooking for us?
Luckily not too many, and that's, I think, because I don't cook meat, because I don't eat meat, so I haven't had anything with like a green piece of meat or something being really underdone. So when you take meat out of the equation, there's not as much room for disaster. So therefore my disaster is a gnocchi based one, which is I made gnocchi from scratch from Jamie Oliver's recipe, and it was perfect and I loved it. I thought I was very smart, and then the second time I went to make it, worked again. I thought, well, this is great, but I have too much, so I'm going to freeze some, and then I'll just cook it from frozen, like other pastas. That didn't work. It turned into just what looked like potato mash. So I've learned my lesson there.
With the publishers of the Moosewood, which was a Bible of kind of California new cuisine in the 80s, and I lived in California for 10 years, so I love cooking those sorts of Californian style Tex-Mex type of meals.
And so what's your favourite book?
I think it would be the Moosewood Cookbook, which is an American book. You may not know it, but it's by a woman called Molly Katzen, and it's kind of like the California version of the Country Women's Association cookbook, except it's visual and beautiful, and an absolute classic you must have in your kitchen if you live in America. Back here, I mean, I love all of the kind of the sort of anything that's really colourful and things like from the Domestic Goddess from Nigella onward, anything that's got a beautiful looking picture that I think, oh, easy enough, only going to take 20 minutes to cook, I'll use, but you just got to love it.
What are you watching today at the Sydney Writers Festival?
So we came this morning to see Sarah Krasnostein talk about her biography, The Trauma Cleaner. So we've all read it, so we thought we would come together and see it, and it was really interesting to hear Sarah talk more in detail about the life of Sandra and what it's like being a writer. I think the way that it captures the life and the profession of the subject, Sandra, who's a trauma cleaner, in a way that's very compassionate and compelling, and really makes you sympathise with her character and her pain and her strength. Yeah, love the book. Yeah, really fascinating read. A great example of Australian biography.
Great. And what's the best book that you've read lately?
I'm actually reading some Helen Garner because I wanted to come and see her at the Writers' Festival but didn't get tickets. So I'm reading her new collection of non-fiction called True Stories. I'm loving it.
Have you read the old classic Monkey Grip?
So I haven't, but the next thing to read is Helen Garner's fiction. Yeah.
Great. Okay, well, thank you so much.
So here we are at the Seymour Centre as part of the Sydney Writers' Festival for 2018, and I'm talking to the entirely glorious Charlotte Wood. I'd like to start by just asking you a little bit about how, your journey to becoming a writer.
Well, I was one of those kids like you, I'm sure, who just read and I loved reading. I didn't start writing until I was in my 20s, my late 20s when I got serious about it. And then my sort of ambition at the beginning was to finish a book. I wrote some short stories. Well, they weren't even short stories. They were little vignettes. But they were good practice. And then I wrote my first novel. It was published when I was 34, I think.
And I believe that you discovered cooking around the same time that you discovered your vocation as a writer.
I did. I didn't cook as a child. My mum was a very fantastic mother and not an enthusiastic cook because she had 5 whinging kids to deal with. But when I was at university and sort of shamefully skipping various uni classes, I had a really good friend who had trained as a chef, and she just taught me sort of some basic stuff about cooking, and then I just became kind of obsessed with it and fell in love with the creativity of it, and I find it a very grounding thing,
That's what I say about it as well, because I also love to cook, and so much of our work is up in our heads and our imaginations. There's something about gardening and cooking, which are my 2 great loves, that just really ground me and make me calm and centered. And it's the same sense of hyperfocus, but it's just, there's something so warm. It's all about love and giving, isn't it?
And it's also about amateurism, it's not for a restaurant, that idea that you can just cook for your friends and it's all gone in a couple of hours.
It's ephemeral. It's ephemeral pleasure.
But very earthly and earthy. So I love that side of it. And also how it brings people together, and it's a really great way of getting to know people, I think. And having that, bringing people together where they're sitting, often in our house, because it's tiny, quite squashed around a table, where people are passing food to each other. It's a very connecting thing, and I love to do it.
As you would all know, Charlotte Wood won the Stella Award for her brilliant book, which hand is it in, Charlotte?
Psychological.
The Natural Way of Things. What a brilliant experience that must have been for you. Can you tell me all about it?
Yeah, it was weird. I mean, it was wonderful when you've been writing for a long time, like you and I have, and I think after a while you sort of find accommodation with the kind of writer you are and the kind of level of success you're going to have, and then this sort of suddenly took off in a way that none of my other books ever had, and I won a couple of prizes, and it was fantastic. I mean, what can you say? It was really joyful, and
it's such a brilliant initiative, the Stella. We just think that to celebrate women writers, to celebrate the many different types of writers that we have in this country, to acknowledge the struggle that women writers can have.
And the Stella Prize, I think one of the best things they do is work in schools, bringing gender equality into book lists in schools. And it really shocked me to realise how few books by women are on English literature reading lists for schools. And so I think that's one of the really crucial things that he was work with really young
And this
girls
is,
and women and boys too.
it's initiating change from the ground up, which is the only way that change can happen. It's
They're an
brilliant.
amazing bunch of women. You know.
Now, much as I love the natural way of things, it isn't actually hugely foodie. There's a couple of little foodie scenes in there, but it's not. It's, well, my
It's set in a prison, and a friend of mine said, well, I can tell what your idea of prison is because they have to eat packet food in the prison. That's a hellhole for you.
It's a hellhole for me too. So if you can hold up Love and Hunger,
This
which
is my food book.
this is Charlotte's food book, and can I tell you that I just loved it. It's very much my kind of book because it draws together a personal memoir, you know, your own life, your own stories. It's practical. I'm a very practical cook and a very practical writer. And there's this incredible, depth of the kind of philosophy, the importance of eating, the problems with, feast and famine, my new favourite word, neophagia, which is the fear of new foods.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Is that the picky eater
Yeah,
thing?
that was
Neophagia.
Yes.
Did
Weren't
I
you
put that in
clever?
there? Wasn't
You
I
put
clever?
that in there.
a while since I read it.
I always knew the word neophobia. I used to say to my children, "It's just neophobia, darling. Eat your Brussels sprouts." But neophagia, that's a good word. That's a hot word. Anyway, I digress. Love this book so much. Can you tell us a little bit about why you came to write it? How long it took you? Because it feels like a meditation over some time.
Yeah, well, it sort of grew out of a blog that I used to write called How to Shuck an Oyster, which was about cooking and just about the kind of meaning of what we do when we sit down to eat with other people and we cook for other people. But initially, I just wanted to write a book of recipes to give for people to make for their friends when they're sick. And then I took that idea to the publisher and I wrote an introduction for that book, which was about when my dad especially was
You
very
made me
ill.
cry. In fact, you made me cry at least 4 times in this book,
Good.
which is a good thing, you know.
Not because of the recipes, they're
No.
really good. So I wrote an introduction for that book, which was about when my dad was sick and people in the town where we lived brought food and how kind of nourishing it was, you know, spiritually as well as physically for us. And then the publisher said, "We really love that. You can sort of do what you want, but make it more memoir-y," which kind of horrified me at first. I don't want to write a memoir. But once I started thinking I can just write about my experience with food, it's not really a memoir, but it's about learning to cook, about overcoming fear of certain things like pastry.
So Charlotte is saying that because much as I love to cook, the one thing I've never conquered is making my own pastry. And since I have read Love and Hunger, it has a whole chapter on how to make pastry. And so I'm going to do it this weekend.
Good. Well, my sister's a really good pastry maker, and I was always terrible, and I just decided I'm going to get over this fear. I think it's called overcoming fear of pastry. And mind you, I ate a hell of a lot of pastry when I was doing that. So
My kids will be so happy because
They
they
will.
love my pies.
Well,
and they always want to make me make a pie. So.
And once you realise it's actually really simple, like when I watch my sister do it, she just goes bam, 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 pastry made.
Yeah.
So you
All
can
right.
get good at it.
Well, if I overcome my fear of making pastry, I'll bake you a pie
Oh, right.
and bring it to you to eat.
I love that.
All right, now, what is your favourite cookbook? And in your book, Love and Hunger, you talk about the first cookbook you ever bought. Can you tell us that story again?
The Elizabeth David cookbooks.
Yes. I really love that story.
Well, yeah, I discovered Elizabeth David when I was at uni, living with my friend who was teaching me to cook, and I went to my painting and drawing teacher's house for lunch, and his wife was an amazing cook, and there was just this incredible smell coming from the kitchen. I was very nervous and shy, and I said, "What's that amazing smell?" And she said, "Oh, it's just an Elizabeth David thing." And I was like, "Oh, right, thank you." I don't know who Elizabeth David is. But then, like a few days later, I found an Elizabeth David paperback in an op shop. So I took it home and I started cooking, you know, beurre en daube and all these beautiful French things. And I've still got that little tiny tattered
Charlotte
little...
Wood, the fabulous cook, was born.
And it was... That day when I went to their house for lunch, I suddenly saw how creativity and cooking were completely connected.
to see the Drama Queen too?
Yeah, yes.
What did you think of it?
Absolutely amazing. She's just such a fantastic author, and the book was a real joy to read. So I got it as a Christmas present, and then I read it within 2 days, and then I gave it to my friend who'd given it to me and said, "You have to read this book. It's just incredible." It was the best book that I'd read lately, and then I recently started reading Her Body and Other Parties by Carmen Maria Machado, and that is an incredible book. So it's a collection of short stories, and from the moment that I started reading it, so the first short story is called The Husband Stitch, and all of the stories in the book are like about female bodies and female sexuality, those kinds of subjects, and I just love the way that she writes, and she writes about queerness in such a natural way, in that it's not like the focus, but it just sort of weaves in through the story in a really beautiful way. Yeah, I'm just loving that book as well.
Thank you for your time. Have a fantastic day today.
Oh, I'm sure I will. I've got a very full day.
Yeah, so good to see a guy here at the Sydney Writers Festival.
A guy? Have you not seen many?
Oh, I've seen a few, but
I've seen plenty of good-looking guys around.
Yeah.
That's why I'm here, actually.
Oh, right.
No, it's not.
Okay, so which events did you come to see here?
I was here a couple of days ago for Richard Nkari's talk on Sagaland, his latest book, Richard Fireman.
Have you read it?
I'm about halfway through. I picked it up knowing that the talk was coming.
Right. And are you enjoying it?
Very much so.
That's
yeah.
good. That's good.
Yeah, they alternate chapters, the two of them, the two authors, and it's very much, if you like conversations with Richard Fireman, it reads much the same way.
Right. I think everybody likes conversations with Richard.
Yeah, who doesn't?
What is the best book that you've read lately?
The most affecting book I've read lately was actually a biography about a man called Gavin Maxwell. He was a travel writer and a poet and a spy and many things. But it was a bit of a tome. It was about his life. A Scottish man who lived with otters, most famously, in the Highlands. Very remote area in the Highlands. A little shack, brought otters up there. Did a lot for conservation of otters.
Right. And is that what you liked about it, the conservation aspect?
Well, he wrote a book called The Ring of Bright Water, which made him most famous, about his life with otters. And it was given to me by a Scottish man when I was up in the Isle of Skye camping under a rowan tree. And he said, "Well, don't touch that rowan tree or you'll curse someone." And I was like, "Why?" And he ended up, his name was Willie the Wanderer, this Scottish man that was yachting around the world. And he told me the whole story of Gavin Maxwell, said you must read the book. I fell in love with the book and that part of the world, and that the autobiography of Gavin Maxwell kind of sucks you into that part of the world.
Oh, that sounds fantastic.
Yeah, it's
Reading
brilliant.
it now, so
So I'm here now at the Sydney Writers Festival, and we're talking to Emma Glass, whose debut novel, The Peach, has been generating so much excitement. I actually stayed up late, really late last night, reading it because I just could not put it down. It's powerful, it's visceral, it's heart-wrenching, it's extraordinarily brave, I thought. So much confidence in yourself as a writer. How did you get the idea? Where did it come from?
It was sort of born of frustration, and I was studying literature and creative writing at university, and Peach started out as my final assignment for my degree, and I didn't have an idea for a story, but I was really attracted to this kind of stream of consciousness voice, and that's kind of how it started, really. And when I realised that I was writing from a place of darkness, that's when I decided that, okay, this is a dark story, and so the characters are going to be dark and traumatized.
Yes. So how did you come to call your protagonist Peach?
Well, I started thinking about her as an abstract being rather than a girl, because she undergoes some significant trauma, and in order to write that violence, I felt like I needed a distance, and I felt that anyone reading it would also need a distance. So the way that I decided to create that distance was to make her an abstract being, and the idea of Peach love of food?
I sort of grew up not really like loving food, not really connecting with it. I'm a child of the 80s and early 90s, and I guess like convenience food. But when I went off to university, I felt like my body was really kind of really affected by my environment, and I wanted to eat well. So I started cooking then. Like my mum had taught me the basics growing up, but that's when I kind of really found my love of cooking, and I also became vegetarian during that time. So it was difficult to learn vegetarian recipes, and now I cook all the time. My boyfriend works evenings, so generally I cook dinner, and it's just nice to be able to use good produce, and I'm really into nose to tail eating and no waste. So it's fun to just get a load of ingredients, not knowing what you're gonna do, and then just like create from what you have.
And there is actually there's a strong symbolic use of food throughout the book.
Yes.
Perhaps you can tell us a little bit about how that came to be and what it meant for you as a vegetarian to be writing those scenes.
So I guess what I was trying to do was really find the language of hate, and I find that really difficult when I think about people. I find it very difficult to hate anyone, actually, and so to get the authentic language of hate, I thought about what I hated most of the time, and it was meat, because I had just become vegetarian. So the sort of evil character in the book is
So evil.
he's a sausage, and he's a sausage because that's what I hated. But to try and make that language authentic, I actually got some sausages and I dissected them and kind of got in there really physically to find the correct words for what I was feeling. So the language is very
kind of squeamishness and that
yeah. And rather than kind of interpret those feelings, I went with the raw meanings of the words. So probably makes me sound a little bit strange. But
No, not at all. Well, I thought it was really brilliantly well done. Nearly every single character in the book almost has some kind of connection to something abstract.
Yes. Yeah. But also to make the world interesting, and also to bring some light comic relief into a really, really dark world. And I think it's really easy to do that when you assign people characteristics, and it's something I'm really terrible at doing in real life.
And so, do you have a favourite cookbook?
Yes, I'm a big lover of Olia Hercules. She's a Ukrainian chef in the UK. She's wonderful, and she's also just a really nice person.
Oh, that's lovely. Now, as you know, we love to spread the word about books and writers here. So can you tell me, what is the very best book that you've read recently?
Yes, I absolutely loved Home Fire by Pamela Shamsi. That's one of my favourites.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us on Photograph TV.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, well here we are. The session has just come out, so all the crowds are milling around. We have another faithful reader here at the Screenwriters Festival. We're just wondering, what's the best thing that you've seen so far here at the festival?
Well, I've been to a lot of things, but the thing I saw yesterday was Stanley Johnson, who's Boris Johnson's father, and it was so entertaining. He's a great storyteller. He really captivated everyone, and he just sort of has done a book that is essentially real life but changed the names, and it's just such a really fun work of fiction. He was entertaining. Then I went to see Katie Tour at the Sydney Town Hall last night, who's the journalist that's written a book called Unbelievable about the Donald Trump campaign. That was really fascinating too. They'd be my two highlights, I'd say, so far of the Writers' Festival.
Great. And so what is the favourite book that you've read lately, or the best book that you've read lately?
Well, the best work of fiction I've read lately was Jane Harper's The Dry. I really loved that.
Everyone's talking about it.
I haven't read her second book yet, but I saw her speak yesterday. She was fascinating. In terms of non-fiction, there's also lots of great non-fiction around. The authors that are sort of speaking, there were quite a few visiting American journalists that I really want to read their books, and largely not just about the Trump campaign, but wars in Syria and Afghanistan and Africa. So I haven't really got a particular favourite on non-fiction world.
What is the best book that you have read recently?
Well, I've been thinking about this. There are quite a few, but I'm going to choose Lloyd Jones's book called The Cage. It's a very full-on book. It's very strange, very moving, very, very powerful. It's sort of looking at the refugee crisis, but through a very sort of altered prism of almost sort of speculative, but very grounded in sort of New Zealand contemporary world. So
because he, of course, wrote Mr. Pip, didn't he? Which I have read, and that had a similar sort of feeling, didn't it?
Yeah,
with
he's
the
an
Charles
amazing
Dickens
writer.
connection.
He's very provocative,
kind of visceral.
Visceral. You know, it's not the easiest read in the world, but it's so amazing, and it's talking about our world now, but through a really a sort of truly creative kind of prism.
So it was a female author, and it was about the Hawkesbury River.
Oh, it wouldn't be.
It was one that was on the ABC.
Kate.
Yes, Grenville.
Grenville, yes, The Secret River.
That's
right.
That
yeah.
was the last one.
It is a good book. I've read it as well.
Yeah, kind of traumatizing when you realise, the history.
What happened.
Yeah.
And yet it was beautifully written.
Very beautifully written.
And that is Eligible by Curtis Sittenfeld. So Eligible is a retelling of Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. And when I first heard, I love Curtis Sittenfeld's work. One of her novels is American Wife, which I really recommend. She also wrote Prep, which is quite well known. And I read about this retelling of Pride and Prejudice, and I thought, this is going to work. And I just thought, oh well, just get it. I started reading it, and it was so delightfully funny, unexpectedly charming, and so appropriate as a reimagining of Pride and Prejudice, in keeping with the tone of the original and all the social mores that were in there, but with its own spin on it. So I think if you're looking for a really entertaining, satisfying, well-written book, you can't beat it. So that's Eligible by Curtis Sittenfeld.
I have to confess, it was Kitty Flanagan's Burning Bridges and Other Hobbies. She's an Australian comedian, and I really did laugh all the way through it.
And this is Jackie Harvey, author of, her latest book is Keynesian Maths. Now, what's the best book you've read lately?
Right, well, I'm currently reading a really good book that's got me straight in from the get-go. It's called The Ruin by Dervla McTiernan. She actually lives in Western Australia, but she's Irish, and this is her debut novel. And it certainly had one of those beginnings. I can't tell you much about it because I haven't gotten too far yet, but it has one of those beginnings that sort of gives you a real punch in the stomach right at the start. You think, I've got to keep going with this book, it's amazing. So,
Kate's read it, I think, and she
I loved it. It was one of my picks for last month. It was fantastic.
I'm looking forward to being able to get my teeth into it a bit more, but at the moment I have another Keynesian Maths to finish, so I'm on a bit of a deadline. I'll probably be
writing, not reading.
If my publisher sees me, I'll be in strife for being out here. Look, my favourite cookbook is a really, really old. It's a cookbook that was actually done by a school that I used to work at called Jimgate down in the Southern Highlands. It's a tiny little cookbook. It just has lots of home recipes in it, so it's the book that I actually use the most out of any of my cookbooks. If I had to say another cookbook, probably I quite like Jamie Oliver. So
yeah, I love Jamie Oliver. Yeah, he is, as I've mentioned before, my all-time favourite